My name is Clara Sterling, and I am 34 years old. 6 months ago, I sat in a sleek, glass-walled lawyer's office in downtown Seattle and watched as my world was systematically dismantled. My parents sat across from me, their faces unreadable, as they handed everything to my older sister, Bianca. The family's timber export business, the sprawling $1.8 million estate on the coast, and a massive trust fund, it all went to her. "You've always been the difficult one, Clara," my mother said, her voice like a sheet of ice. "Bianca chose family. You chose yourself." Bianca didn't even look guilty. She just gave me a small, triumphant smile that didn't reach her eyes. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I stood up, looked my sister in the eye, and walked out without saying a single word. I thought that was the end of us. But last week, my phone exploded with 62 missed calls. When I finally answered, my mother was hyperventilating on the other end. "Clara, help us. The FBI just raided Bianca's house. They're talking about international money laundering and embezzlement. What has she done with the money?" Before I tell you the journey that led to this total collapse, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you truly love this story. I would also love to know where you are watching from and what the local time is there. Please leave a comment below. To understand how we ended up with federal agents at our door, I have to take you back to the beginning. Growing up, I was always the outsider in my own family. Bianca was 4 years older, and from the time I could remember, she was the sun everyone orbited around. My parents viewed every breath she took as a miracle, while my achievements were treated as mere expectations. When she graduated high school, my parents threw a lavish gala with 150 guests. 4 years later, when I graduated with highest honors, we went to a quick dinner at a local chain restaurant, just the four of us. My father barely looked up from his steak. When Bianca decided to stay home and work for Sterling Timber Export, my parents were overjoyed. They bought her a brand new car and helped her rent a luxury apartment downtown to support her transition into the professional world. However, when I announced I had been accepted into a prestigious accounting program, my mother didn't celebrate. She simply sighed and said, "We can't help with your tuition, Clara. You're so independent, you understand." I understood perfectly. I took out massive student loans, worked 2 jobs while maintaining a full course load, and graduated with a 3.8 GPA. My parents didn't even show up to my graduation. My mother explained over the phone that they couldn't leave the business for a whole weekend, and that Bianca couldn't manage everything alone. That same weekend, I saw Bianca's social media posts from a luxury wine tasting trip. I moved away, got my CPA license, and started building a life for myself in the city. I paid off my loans dollar by dollar, alone. I still called home every Sunday, but every conversation followed the same script. My mother would barely say hello before asking, "How's Bianca? She's been working so hard at the company." My life was always an afterthought. The message was loud and clear. Bianca sacrificed, Bianca stayed, so Bianca mattered. I was just the one who left. The first real crack in the foundation appeared 2 years before that final lawyer meeting. My mother called me, frantic about tax filing deadlines. "Clara, you're an accountant. Can you please look at our books? We're so behind." I flew home that weekend, spending my own money on the flight, and spent 48 hours hunched over spreadsheets and receipts at the kitchen table. That's when I noticed the irregularities. There were several large cash withdrawals over the past year, totaling nearly $120,000. There were no invoices, no documentation, just miscellaneous expenses scribbled in Bianca's distinctive handwriting. When I confronted my mother in the living room, her face hardened instantly. "That's company business, Clara." I tried to explain as a professional. "Mom, if the IRS audits you, they will want documentation. You need clear records of where that $120,000 went." Bianca walked in right then, her arms crossed defensively. "Are you seriously interrogating us about our private finances? You don't work here, Clara. You don't get to tell us how to run things." My mother stood up, her voice trembling with anger. "This is exactly why we don't ask you for help anymore. You always find problems. You always make everything complicated." I closed my laptop. I was trying to protect them from a legal disaster, but to them, I was just being difficult again. The final blow came on a Tuesday morning in March. I received a formal email from an attorney, Lawrence Greenberg. Subject, family meeting. Your attendance required. My father was healthy and my mother was active, so the mention of estate matters made my stomach drop. I texted Bianca to ask what it was about, but she didn't respond for hours. When I called my mother, she was brisk and cold. No one is sick, Clara. We just need to discuss family business. Don't be late. On the flight home, I ran through every possibility. Maybe they were finally discussing retirement. Or maybe. And this thought made my chest tighten with a flicker of hope. They were finally going to acknowledge what Grandma Silas had actually said in her will. My grandmother had passed away 5 years ago, leaving behind a trust fund she had built over decades. I remembered her lawyer mentioning something about equal shares for both granddaughters. But my parents had handled the details while I was grieving, and I had been too heartbroken to ask questions. I thought that maybe, finally, they were ready to make things right. I should have known better. When I arrived at the lawyer's office, 10 minutes early, the receptionist told me they were already inside. I walked down the hall and saw them through the glass panel. My parents and Bianca, sitting around a polished table, laughing with the lawyer over coffee. No one had waited for me. When I entered, there were no hugs. My father simply stated, "Jen, you made it." There were neat folders prepared for them, but in front of my seat, the table was completely empty. The lawyer, Lawrence Greenberg, cleared his throat and began reading. The family residence, valued at $1.8 million, will be transferred to Bianca Sterling. My heart stopped. That was the only home I had ever known. He continued, "The business, Sterling Timber Export, including all client contracts, will also be transferred to Bianca." Then came the final strike. The family trust fund, currently valued at $950,000, will be placed under Bianca's sole management and ownership. Greenberg turned the page and looked at me. For Clara Sterling, no assets have been designated at this time. The silence in the room was deafening. "I'm sorry, what?" I whispered. My mother spoke up immediately, her tone firm. "Clara, we've discussed this carefully. This is what makes the most sense." I looked at my father, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "You chose to leave, Clara," he said quietly. "Bianca stayed and sacrificed. She's earned this." They were rewarding her for staying in the nest they had built for her, while punishing me for the independence they had forced me to develop. My sister leaned back, sipping her coffee, looking like she had just won a war she didn't even have to fight. She had everything now, and as far as my parents were concerned, I was no longer part of the Sterling legacy. I realized then that my flexibility and hard work had been my undoing in their eyes. But as I walked out of that office, I knew one thing. I had the CPA license, I had the truth about Grandma's will, and Bianca had a $120,000 hole in her records that was about to become a federal problem. That day at the lawyer office was not just a random act of cruelty. It was the culmination of a decade spent being the outsider in my own bloodline. As I walked to my car, the word difficult echoed in my head. My mother had used that word like a weapon for years, but it was not until I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the Seattle skyline, that I truly remembered when that label became permanent. To understand the FBI raid and the total collapse of the Sterling family, you have to understand what happened 2 years ago, long before the lawyer meeting. It was the moment I realized that in my family, the truth was a fire they were determined to put out. The call came on a frantic Tuesday evening. My mother sounded like the world was ending. "Clara, we are so behind on the tax filings for Sterling Timber Export. The accountants we usually use are giving us a hard time about missing records." "You are a CPA, Clara. You have that flexibility with your time. Can you please fly home and look at our books? We are so stressed, and Bianca is doing everything herself. She really needs your help." I should have known better. I was living in Seattle, working 60 hours a week at a mid-sized accounting firm, trying to build a career that my parents barely acknowledged. When I graduated with honors, my celebration was a quick dinner at a local chain restaurant, while Bianca, graduation years prior, had been a gala for 150 people. But that was the pattern. Bianca stayed home to help with the family woodworking and timber business, so she was the martyr. I was the one who left, so I was the one who owed them. I booked a flight with my own money and arrived on a Friday. The house felt the same as always, a place where Bianca's photos lined every hallway, and my presence felt like a guest who stayed too long. I sat at the kitchen table with spreadsheets and faded receipts scattered everywhere. Bianca was out for the evening, probably at another wine tasting event like the one she posted about during my graduation weekend. As a professional, I dove into the numbers. I expected a few missing invoices or some sloppy record keeping. What I found was much darker. As I scrolled through the digital ledgers and compared them to the bank statements, a massive red flag appeared. Over the last 12 months, there were several large cash withdrawals. These were not small amounts for office supplies or petty cash. These were chunks of money being moved out of the business account. When I totaled them up, the number hit me like a physical blow: $80,000. $80,000 in cash, pulled out in increments that seemed designed to stay just under the radar of major reporting. I looked for the documentation. I searched for invoices from contractors, equipment purchase orders, or timber permits. There was nothing. In the column where the explanation should have been, there was only one word scribbled in Bianca's distinctive loopy handwriting: miscellaneous. My heart started pounding. As an accountant, I knew exactly what the IRS would do with $80,000 of miscellaneous cash withdrawals. It was a legal nightmare waiting to happen. I found my mother in the living room, comfortably reading a magazine near the fireplace. I tried to keep my voice calm, but the professional in me was screaming. "Mom, I need to ask you about these withdrawals in the company books. There is $80,000 missing from the accounts over the last year with no documentation. Where did this money go?" My mother did not even look up at first. When she did, her face hardened in a way I had seen 1,000 times before. "That is company business, Clara. You are here to help with the taxes, not to audit your own family." I stepped closer, the spreadsheets in my hand. "Mom, I am trying to help. If the IRS audits the business, they will want clear records. You cannot just write off $80,000 as miscellaneous and expect them to accept it. You need to show where that money went, or you could face serious fraud charges." Right then, the front door swung open and Bianca walked in, her arms crossed defensively over her expensive coat. She must have heard me from the foyer. "Are you seriously going through our private finances now?" she snapped. "Mom asked you to help with the tax filing, not to act like a federal investigator." "Bianca, I am an accountant," I replied, trying to stay composed. "Helping with taxes means ensuring the numbers are legal. I am telling you, this $80,000 is a huge liability. It is a legal requirement to show where that money went." Bianca did not flinch. She just looked at my mother and sighed as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "You see, Mom? This is what she does. She comes back here and tries to tell us how to run the business we've been managing for 20 years. You don't work here, Clara. You don't understand the expenses we have. You don't get to come in and interrogate us." My mother stood up then, her voice trembling with that cold, final tone she used when she wanted to shut me out. "This is exactly why we don't ask you for help anymore, Clara. You always find problems. You always make everything complicated. We don't need your lectures on how to be a family." I looked at both of them, stunned. I was trying to protect their legacy, the business my father had built for 3 decades, and they were treating me like a traitor. "I'm not trying to be complicated, Mom. I'm trying to keep you out of legal trouble." "We don't need your protection," Bianca interrupted. "We know what we are doing." "You mean well, Jen," my mother added, her voice softening into that condescending tone that hurt worse than the shouting. "But you are always so paranoid. Everything is fine. Bianca has it under control." I closed my laptop. The silence in the living room was deafening. I realized then that they did not want an accountant. They wanted a rubber stamp. They wanted me to use my professional license to hide whatever Bianca was doing with that $80,000. I flew back to Seattle the next morning, exhausted and numb. I never brought it up again, thinking that if I just stayed out of it, the storm would pass me by. I did not know then that the $80,000 was just the tip of the iceberg. I did not know that Bianca had already begun moving much larger sums from the trust fund my grandma Silas had left for us. I went back to my life, paying off my own student loans and working my way up the corporate ladder, while my family continued to celebrate Bianca's sacrifice and her leadership. The warning signs were all there. The miscellaneous scribbles, the defensive anger, the way my mother chose to call me difficult rather than look at the truth. They chose to believe in the lie because the lie was comfortable. But as I sat in my car 2 years later, remembering that confrontation, I knew the FBI raid was not an accident. It was the natural consequence of a family that valued loyalty over integrity. Bianca had spent years playing with fire, and my parents had spent years handing her the matches while telling me I was the one who was burned. Please take a moment to like and subscribe if this story is resonating with you. Have you ever been the only person in your family willing to point out a disaster before it happened? Drop a comment below with the word truth if you have ever been silenced for being right. Stay tuned, because the email I received on a Tuesday morning in March was about to prove that my paranoia was actually the only thing that could have saved us. 2 years passed after that cold confrontation in the kitchen. I went back to Seattle, diving into my work as a CPA, trying to convince myself that the distance would keep me safe from my family's toxic patterns. I paid my student loans, worked 60-hour weeks, and lived a quiet life. I thought I had found peace until a Tuesday morning in March when an email arrived from an attorney named Lawrence Greenberg. The subject line was chilling. Family meeting, your attendance required. My father was healthy and my mother was active, so the mention of estate matters felt like a weight dropping in my stomach. I reached out to Bianca, but for 3 hours, there was no response. When I finally spoke to my mother, her voice was brisk and dismissive. "No one is sick, Jen. We just need to finalize some family business. Be there on Friday at 10. Do not be late." I took the day off, booked a last-minute flight, and spent the entire journey running through possibilities. Maybe they were selling the business. Maybe they were setting up retirement. Or maybe, in the back of my mind, I hoped they were finally going to settle Grandma Dorothy's trust fund. The one she had promised would be split equally between Bianca and me. Subscribe to the channel right now. Let me tell you about the moment everything started to fall apart. If you have ever felt like the black sheep of the family for simply trying to be successful, leave a comment with the word strong below. I want to hear your stories. I arrived at Lawrence Greenberg's office 10 minutes early, my hands trembling despite the mild spring air. The building was a modest brick structure, but the atmosphere inside was heavy with the scent of old paper and silent verdicts. The receptionist barely looked up, pointing me toward conference room B. "They are already inside," she said. Already inside. Of course they were. Through the glass panel, I could see them, my parents and Bianca, sitting around a polished wooden table, laughing and sharing coffee with the lawyer. There were neat folders prepared for each of them, but in front of my designated chair at the far end of the table, there was nothing but empty wood. No one had waited for me. No one offered a hug. My father simply noted my arrival as a statement of fact, as if I were a stranger joining a public hearing. Lawrence Greenberg cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses as the air in the room turned clinical. "We are here to finalize the distribution of family assets as requested by Robert and Margaret Sterling," he began. My heart hammered against my ribs as he opened the first folder. "The family residence, valued at $1.8 million, will be transferred to Bianca Sterling." I blinked, the image of my childhood home flashing before my eyes. The place where Grandma Dorothy had lived with us, the place filled with every memory I possessed. Next, the business, Sterling Timber Export, including all client contracts and inventory, will also be transferred to Bianca. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white. Then came the final strike. The Family Trust Fund, currently valued at $800,000, will be placed under Bianca's sole management and ownership. Greenberg turned the page and scanned the document. For Clara Sterling, no assets have been designated at this time. The silence that followed was deafening. I found my voice, though it felt small and fragile. "I am sorry, what?" My mother didn't hesitate. Her face was a mask of cold resolve. "Clara, we've discussed this carefully as a family. This is what makes the most sense." "I wasn't part of that discussion," I retorted, my voice cracking. "Bianca has been here. My father added quietly, still refusing to look me in the eye. She stayed. She helped with the business. She's been present. And you haven't. The injustice of it felt like a physical blow. Mom, I didn't choose to leave because I hated this family. I went to college. I built a career because you told me you wouldn't pay for my tuition. You left when we needed you. My mother snapped, her tone firm. Bianca stayed and sacrificed. She's earned this. Earned what? I asked. Everything? Bianca finally spoke, her voice carefully neutral but laced with a smug superiority. Clara, you have a good job. You're stable. You don't need this. This isn't about need, Bianca. This is about fairness. This is about family, I said, the tears finally stinging my eyes. Family is about being there, my mother cut in. You've always been difficult, Clara. Always questioning everything, always making things complicated. The word hit me like a slap. Difficult. I was difficult because I wanted to know where $120,000 of missing company cash had gone. I was difficult because I graduated with honors while they were wine tasting with Bianca. I was difficult because I had the audacity to exist outside of their control. Your sister has proven herself, Clara, my father added. We need someone dependable. I thought about the student loans I had paid alone, the graduation they had missed, and the hundreds of Sunday calls where I was treated like an afterthought. I looked at the three of them, a united front of exclusion. I realized then that I wasn't being punished for leaving. I was being punished for succeeding without them. I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. Lawrence Greenberg looked startled and asked if I wanted to review the documents. No, thank you, I said quietly. I understand perfectly. My mother frowned. Clara, don't be dramatic. I'm not being dramatic, Mom. I'm just leaving. I picked up my purse and looked at Bianca. She looked uncomfortable for the first time, shifting in her seat. I gave her a smile, not a bitter one, but a clear, final one. Congratulations, Bianca. I hope it all works out for you. I walked toward the door, but paused for one last question. Just out of curiosity, what happened to Grandma Dorothy's money? She left a trust fund specifically for Bianca and me. Equal shares. I remember that from the funeral. The room went very still. My mother's face hardened into a mask of granite. That money went toward family expenses, she said. The house, the business, things that benefited the family. I nodded slowly. Right, the family. Which, in this room, clearly doesn't include me. I walked out and closed the door behind me, leaving the $1.8 million house, the business, and the $800,000 trust fund behind. My hands were shaking as I sat in my rental car, but I didn't cry. I had been erased from their history, but as I started the engine, a plan was forming. I remembered Grandma Dorothy's lawyer, not Greenberg, but someone else. I remembered a courtesy copy of a will sent to my email 5 years ago that I had been too grief-stricken to read. The Sterling family thought they had won. They thought they had finally silenced the difficult daughter. But they forgot one thing. I am an accountant. I know how to follow the money, and I knew that Grandma Dorothy would never have intended for her legacy to be used as a weapon of exclusion. The battle for the inheritance was over, but the search for the truth was just beginning. I hope this story helps you see your own worth. Please comment, I see my worth below if you are determined to respect yourself and your boundaries. If you want to see how the FBI eventually got involved and how the truth about that $800,000 trust fund finally came to light, check the description for the next part of this story. I will see you there. The transition was complete, and for 3 months, Bianca lived as the undisputed queen of sterling timber export. I watched from a distance as she transformed our family's digital legacy into a highlight reel of her own supposed brilliance. Every other day, there was a new photo of her standing in front of the $0.8 million estate, usually with a glass of wine in hand, captioned with words like leadership or family legacy. To the 80 guests who had attended her celebration, and to the wider community in Seattle, she was the devoted daughter who had earned it all. To me, she was the person who was currently sitting on my $250,000 inheritance while I worked 60 hours a week to maintain my own life. But while Bianca was busy posing for the cameras, she was making a catastrophic mistake that would eventually bring the entire house of cards crashing down. You see, Bianca had always been desperate for approval, especially the kind of approval that comes with being seen as a financial visionary. She didn't want to just manage a timber business. She wanted to be a mogul. That was her greatest weakness, and a man named Marcus Sheffield knew exactly how to exploit it. According to the records that would later be uncovered by federal investigators, Bianca was approached by Sheffield shortly after she took control of the family trust fund. He presented himself as a high-level venture capitalist with a portfolio that looked like it belonged on Wall Street. He spoke in the kind of complex financial jargon that made Bianca feel like she was finally in the big leagues. He promised her returns that were, quite frankly, impossible, telling her he could double her investment in less than 2 years. Blinded by her own ego and the need to prove she was more successful than her difficult accountant sister, Bianca did the unthinkable. She didn't do her due diligence. She didn't check with the SEC, and she certainly didn't consult a professional financial advisor. Instead, she lent loot, secretly, moved over $600,000 from the family trust into an account controlled by Sheffield. What she didn't know, what she refused to see, was that Sheffield's investment group was a sophisticated front for an international money laundering and investment fraud scheme. This wasn't a hedge fund. It was a pyramid scheme that was already being tracked by federal agents across 3 different countries. The bulk of the liquid wealth my grandmother had saved was gone, vanished into offshore accounts within 48 hours of the transfer. But Bianca didn't know that yet. She was still under the illusion that she was growing the family wealth and would eventually tell us all how brilliant she was. Then came a Tuesday morning that changed everything. I was sitting in my office, deeply focused on a client's quarterly audit, when my phone lit up on the desk. It was Bianca. We hadn't spoken a single word since I walked out of that lawyer's office 3 months prior. My heart skipped a beat as I stared at her name. I almost didn't answer, but the professional in me needed to know what could have prompted her to call. The conversation started with a fake, strained politeness that made my skin crawl. "Hi, Clara. How are you?" she asked, her voice sounding higher and more nervous than usual. I didn't play along. I stayed cool and professional. "I'm fine, Bianca. What do you need?" There was a long, heavy pause on the other end. I could hear her shifting uncomfortably, likely in our father's old leather chair. Then she let it out. "Look, the house needs a new roof. The inspector says there is major water damage from the last storm and it can't wait. I need to borrow $15,000. I blinked, certain I had misheard the amount. "You need to borrow $15,000? From me?" "Just temporarily," she said, her voice gaining that familiar edge of entitlement. "I'll pay you back in 3 months. I promise. It's just an emergency." I leaned back in my chair, the irony of the situation hitting me with the force of a physical blow. "Bianca, you were just handed a trust fund worth nearly $1 million. You have the business, you have the house. Why on earth are you asking me for a loan?" "The money it's tied up right now," she stammered, using the exact phrase I'd heard 100 times from failing clients. "I made some investments, really good ones, but they're not liquid at the moment. It's just a minor cash flow issue." "What kind of investments?" I asked, my CPA instincts screaming at me. "You don't tie up nearly $1 million so tightly that you can't find $15,000 for a roof repair. That doesn't make any sense." "That's not really your concern, Clara," she snapped, her defensiveness returning in full force. "I'm asking because you're my sister, and I need help. Do you really want Mom and Dad's house to fall apart because you're being stubborn?" "It's your house now, Bianca," I reminded her, my voice steady. "And no, I don't have $15,000 to lend you. I have student loans, rent, and my own expenses to manage." "Yes, you do," she shouted. "You're an accountant. You make great money. You've always been so selfish, Jen. You always think only about yourself." The word selfish hit me, but it didn't hurt this time. It was the same label they had used to disinherit me, and now she was using it because I wouldn't fund the maintenance of the estate she had stolen from me. I thought about the $250,000 of mine she was currently investing in a fraud scheme, and a cold sense of clarity washed over me. "I'll remember you said that," I told her quietly. "Good luck with the roof." I hung up and sat in the silence of my office. I knew then that something was terribly wrong. You don't ask the person you just robbed for a loan unless you are drowning. I didn't know about the FBI yet, and I didn't know about Marcus Sheffield, but I knew my sister. Her tren, brazen request was a sign that the queen was losing her throne. She had spent over $600,000 of our family's future on a dream of being a mogul, and the reality was about to come knocking on her door in the form of federal agents. The era of Bianca's sacrifice was ending, and the era of consequences was about to begin. I hope this story gives you the strength to stand your ground when people who have mistreated you suddenly need a favor. Please take a moment to like and subscribe if you want to see how the truth finally exploded. I am curious. What would you have said if the person who took your inheritance asked you for a loan? Leave a comment below with the word boundaries if you think Clara did the right thing. Stay tuned for the next part because the FBI was about to turn Bianca's perfect life into a national news story. 6 months after that cold morning in the lawyer's office, the silence I had built around my new life in Seattle was shattered in a single hour. It was a Friday morning, and I was in the middle of a high-stakes client meeting, my phone face down on the polished mahogany table. I felt it vibrate once, then twice, then a relentless rhythmic buzzing that didn't stop for 10 minutes. When the meeting finally ended, I picked up the device and froze. 62 missed calls, 10 from my mother, 5 from my father, and the rest from Bianca. There were 23 text messages, the most recent one from my mother simply saying, "Clara, answer your phone, emergency." My hands shook as I stepped into an empty conference room to call my mother back. She answered on the first ring, her voice a jagged, gasping sob. "The FBI is at Bianca's house right now, Clara. They came with a warrant. They're taking everything, the computers, the filing cabinets, the business records." I gripped the edge of the table, the air in the room suddenly feeling very thin. "They're saying something about embezzlement and money laundering." "Clara, what did Bianca do with the money?" The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. 6 months ago, I was the difficult daughter who was written out of the family legacy because I was paranoid for noticing financial irregularities. Now, the very family that had silenced me was hyperventilating on the other end of the line, begging for the expertise they had once mocked. My mother's voice broke as she made a staggering accusation. "Bianca said you reported her. She said this was your fault because you were jealous of her being the CEO." "I didn't report anyone," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I haven't even spoken to her in 3 months." But as I listened to my mother's frantic description of federal agents raiding the $1.8 million estate, the pieces of the puzzle began to click into place. I immediately looked up the local news on my laptop. The headline was already live. FBI raids local business owner's home in financial fraud investigation. The report mentioned a connection to an international pyramid scheme that had defrauded investors of millions. The homeowner had allegedly transferred over $600,000 into accounts linked to the scheme. $600,000. The family trust fund had been valued at $950,000 6 months ago. Bianca had clearly moved more than half of it into a fraudulent fund, likely the one run by Marcus Sheffield, the fake venture capitalist she had mentioned when she tried to borrow money from me. My father's voice suddenly came through in the background, distant but clear, shouting at my mother to get off the phone because their lawyer told them not to talk to anyone. Then my mother shrieked back, "Jen, you have to help. You're an accountant. You understand these things. You can explain to the FBI that Bianca didn't know it was a scam." "Mom, stop," I replied, my voice firmer than I had ever used with her. "I cannot help with this. I am not a criminal defense investigator. Bianca made choices, and now she has to face the consequences." My mother started sobbing again, calling me cold and heartless for refusing to save the sister who had happily watched me be disinherited. An hour later, I received a call from Patricia Myers, the attorney who had handled my Grandma Dorothy's estate. Her voice was grave. "Clara, I want to assure you that you are not implicated in this investigation. The FBI contacted me to verify your portion of the trust, and I confirmed that you never received your funds. They have cleared you entirely." The relief was short-lived. replaced by a deep sadness for the destruction of my father's life's work. Patricia explained that if Bianca couldn't prove she was a victim, she was facing years in federal prison. Because Bianca had ignored every warning sign and facilitated transfers into offshore accounts, the government was treating her as a participant in a money laundering operation. That night, Bianca called me. Her voice was raw, the sound of someone whose world had turned to ash in a single day. "Clara, please." I didn't know it was fake. Marcus said I could double the money in 2 years. I thought I was growing the family wealth. That wasn't family wealth, Bianca, I told her. Half of that trust was mine. You moved $600,000 of stolen money into a scam without doing a single minute of due diligence. I was going to tell you, she shouted, her entitlement still flickering through the panic. I was going to give you your share after it doubled. I closed my eyes, realizing she still didn't understand. She had gambled with my inheritance, my father's business, and my mother's home, all to prove she was the capable CEO she was never qualified to be. The fallout was absolute. The accounts were frozen. The sterling timber export business was effectively shuttered as agents seized every record. My parents were in a state of total collapse, realizing that the daughter they had championed had destroyed their retirement, their reputation, and their peace of mind in less than half a year. Bianca was facing a massive legal battle, and without the liquid cash she had already lost to Marcus Sheffield, she was looking at selling the very house she had smiled triumphantly over just 6 months ago. I hope this story serves as a powerful reminder to always trust your instincts and value your own worth, even when those closest to you try to make you feel small. Please comment, "I see my worth," if you are determined to stand your ground and protect your own boundaries. If you have ever seen someone's true colors only after they needed something from you, please hit the like button and subscribe. If you want to hear how the legal battle ended and what happened to my parents after they lost the house, check the description for the final part of this story. I will see you there. The aftermath of the FBI raid on Bianca's house felt like a heavy, suffocating fog had settled over our entire family dynamic. My phone remained a constant source of vibration and noise, filled with the desperate voices of people who had spent the last decade trying to make me feel small. That evening, as I sat in my quiet apartment in Seattle, the irony of the situation was a bitter pill to swallow. Just 6 months ago, I was the difficult daughter who was written out of the family legacy because I was paranoid for noticing financial irregularities. Now, the very people who had silenced me were begging for the expertise they had once mocked. My father called the next morning, his voice sounding older and more fragile than I had ever heard it. He didn't ask how I was. He went straight to the demand. He told me that we needed to talk about what I was going to tell the FBI. I told him flatly that I was not telling them anything because I was not involved in Bianca's mess. My father's tone hardened instantly, and he insisted that I could help by vouching for Bianca's character. I had to explain to him that character references do not matter in federal fraud investigations, where the agents only care about the evidence. Then came the request that made my blood run cold. He asked me to go through Bianca's financial documents because I was trained for it. I refused. I told him that I am an accountant, not a criminal defense investigator. He called me stubborn, and I realized he still didn't understand the gravity of the situation. I explained that I was protecting myself from legal liability. If I got involved and said the wrong thing, I could be called as a witness or even subpoenaed, and I was not willing to put my career on the line for a crime I didn't commit. I had to remind him of the truth they all wanted to forget. 2 years ago, I had warned them about the financial irregularities in the business, and I told them something was off. I reminded him that my mother had called me paranoid and said I was making things complicated. They had shut me down then, and now they wanted my help after they had given Bianca everything and left me with nothing. My father argued that they had given her responsibility, not just assets, but I corrected him. They had given her my inheritance from Grandma Dorothy, and they had let her use it however she wanted. Now that the money was gone and the FBI was involved, they were suddenly surprised. My father told me I had become very hard, but I simply told him I had become honest. I need to pause here and ask you something. Do you think I should have helped them? Is there ever a time when forgiveness becomes letting people take advantage of you? Leave your thoughts in the comments, as I genuinely want to know what you think. If this story resonates with you, please like and subscribe to the channel. That evening, I realized that I needed to establish a final, unbreakable boundary. I sat down at my laptop and spent 3 hours drafting an email. This wasn't about anger or revenge. It was about clarity and survival. I addressed it to my father, my mother, and Bianca. I wanted to be very clear about my role in the current situation. I wrote that I was not involved in any way with Bianca's financial decisions or the investigation surrounding them. I clarified that I had not reported anyone to the authorities, but I had provided truthful information to the estate lawyers about my grandmother's will when they contacted me. I told them that while I was genuinely sorry Bianca was facing legal trouble, I would not involve myself in the case. I stated clearly that I was not qualified to help with criminal defense matters, and doing so would put me at legal risk. I reminded them that 2 years ago, when I tried to warn them, I was dismissed. When I tried to be part of the family's decisions, I was excluded. I explained that I was not trying to punish anyone now, but I was simply protecting myself and respecting the boundaries they had set when they decided I wasn't part of the family's future. I ended the email by wishing Bianca a good attorney and hoping the investigation resolved as fairly as possible, but I reiterated that I would not be participating. The response was almost instantaneous. My mother replied within 5 minutes, calling me heartless. My father didn't reply at all. Bianca sent a short, biting message saying she would never forgive me for this. I closed my laptop and didn't respond to any of them. I had said what I needed to say, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to apologize for my own boundaries. I followed the news as it broke publicly. The headlines described a local business owner charged in connection to an international investment fraud scheme. Prosecutors alleged that over $600,000 had been transferred into accounts linked to a money laundering operation. The business my father had built for over 30 years was listed for sale to cover legal fees and restitution. The house I grew up in, the $1.8 million estate, was also gone. The reputation of the Sterling family was destroyed, and Bianca had deleted all her social media accounts to escape the public scrutiny. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only a deep, aching sadness that it had come to this. My family had made their choices, and now they were paying the price for those choices. They had decided I wasn't worth including or trusting, and that decision had finally caught up with them. I realized that walking away wasn't giving up. It was finally growing up. I was no longer the small, accommodating daughter desperate for their approval. I was a woman with a life I was proud of, a home that was mine, and a peace that was not dependent on whether they ever understood what they had done to me. I hope this story gives you the courage to stand up for yourself. Please comment, "I see my worth," if you are determined to respect your own boundaries and value your own journey, no matter what others say. If you want to hear how the final legal redistribution of the estate changed my life and where I am now, be sure to check the description for the next video. 2 months after the FBI raid turned the Sterling family name into a headline for financial fraud, the dust finally began to settle. The news broke on a gray Tuesday morning in a clinical article that detailed the fall of Bianca Sterling. She had officially pleaded guilty to participation in a fraudulent financial scheme. To avoid a lengthy prison sentence, she had cooperated with federal investigators to bring down Marcus Sheffield, but the cost of her plea deal was absolute. Bianca was ordered to pay $250,000 in fines and restitution. To cover these costs and the mountain of legal fees she had accumulated, the $1.8 million estate and the family timber business were seized and listed for sale. The life Bianca had built on a foundation of theft and entitlement was gone. The business my father had spent 30 years building vanished in a single court order. The house where I had grown up, the house where I was once told I was too difficult to belong, was now just an asset to be liquidated for debt. While the world I once knew was collapsing, my phone rang. It was Patricia Myers, the estate attorney who had been my only ally in the search for the truth. Her voice was warm, a sharp contrast to the coldness I had lived with for so long. "Clara, I have good news," she said. "The court has approved the redistribution of your grandmother's estate according to her original will. Your portion of the trust, the $350,000 Grandma Silas intended for you, has been recovered from the frozen accounts." I sat at my kitchen table in Seattle, staring at the numbers on my screen as the wire transfer cleared. $350,000. It was the money that should have been mine 5 years ago. It was the money that could have saved me from the crushing weight of student loans and the fear of never having a home of my own. Patricia asked if I wanted to sue my parents and Bianca for the interest and damages given their misappropriation of the funds. I thought about it for exactly 10 seconds and said no. I didn't want to spend the next 3 years in a courtroom breathing the same air as people who had spent my whole life trying to make me feel invisible. I just wanted my peace. The first thing I did was pay off my student loans in full, every single cent. I watched the balance drop to zero, and for the first time since I was 22, I felt like I could truly breathe. Next, I put a down payment on a beautiful, quiet condo with a view of the water, a place that was mine, a place where no one could tell me I was a guest or a burden. But the most important thing I did was for Grandma Silas. I contacted my old university and established the Silas Sterling Scholarship for students who, like me, were navigating their education without family support. I put $75,000 into that fund to ensure that 10 students every year would have someone believing in their potential, even if their own families didn't. A week after the funds arrived, I received a text from my mother. It was the first message in months. "I see you got the money. I hope you're happy now that you have everything and we have nothing." There was no "I'm sorry." There was no "we were wrong." There was only the same bitterness and the same refusal to take accountability for the choices they had made. My father sent a message 3 days later saying simply, "Your mother is very hurt, Clara." Again, the focus was on their pain, never on the decades of exclusion they had forced upon me. I realized then that I didn't need their apology to be whole. I had been waiting my entire life for them to see my worth, but the truth was, they had already decided who I was to them. Walking away from that lawyer's office 6 months ago wasn't just about the money. It was about the moment I stopped waiting for their permission to be okay. Bianca never reached out. I heard through the grapevine that she was living in a small apartment and working a job that didn't involve managing a single cent of someone else's money. The sun that everyone once orbited had finally burned out. And in the quiet that followed, I found my own light. I hope this story will allow you to appreciate yourself and the immense value you bring to this world, even if the people closest to you are still looking at you through an old, narrow lens. This journey taught me that boundaries are not acts of cruelty. They are acts of self-preservation. You are not responsible for setting yourself on fire to keep others warm, especially when they never once offered you a match. Love without respect isn't love. It is exploitation. And if people call you difficult for having standards, let them. Their opinion of you is not your responsibility, but your peace of mind is. I chose peace, and for the first time in my life, I don't feel guilty about it. I hope this story allows you to cherish yourself. Please comment, "I see my value," if you are determined to respect yourself in the way I have learned to. If you want to hear more stories about setting boundaries and finding your voice, check the description for my next video. See you there. If you've ever had to protect your own worth from the people who were supposed to love you most, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us bring more stories of resilience and justice to light. Remember, you deserve to be treated with respect, always. Last month, an email appeared in my inbox from Bianca. I haven't opened it yet. Maybe one day I will be ready to see if she has finally taken accountability or if she is still blaming me for the consequences of her own choices. But today, I'm choosing me. I'm choosing the version of myself that is strong, boundaried, and finally free. I am no longer waiting for anyone's permission to be okay. I already am.